Some wounds never learned to speak. They just settled quietly inside us, a soft echo beneath the heartbeat. Maybe you know the feeling. You laugh, work, show up for life. Yet something inside feels unfinished, like a story paused mid-sentence. Sometimes it appears in love, in the way you pull close, or suddenly disappear. Sometimes it shows up at night, when everything is silent and the ache finally has room to breathe. You don't remember when it began, only that a younger version of you still waits, hoping someone will finally notice. If any part of this feels familiar, you're exactly where you need to be. They say children don't remember everything, but the body does, and so does the unconscious mind. A child learns the world long before words, through tone, silence, frustration, and presence. When love feels inconsistent or attention is scarce, an invisible wound begins to form. Jungian psychology explains how this shapes the unconscious mind, influencing the persona and shadow that later govern adulthood. It's not loud. It whispers through identity, self-worth, and the meaning of life. Many grow up feeling strangely small, like they missed a class everyone else attended. This wound doesn't vanish with age. It simply buries itself deeper. Sometimes people think they've moved on, yet their nervous system quietly disagrees, holding memories as symbols and meaning beneath the surface. That's why some adults become overly agreeable, the I'm fine kind, terrified of upsetting others. It's not just a habit, it's emotional alchemy, a survival code learned early. They scan rooms before entering, sensing tension, learning to please. They become interpreters of feelings, healers of others, a pattern Jung might call the early initiation into the wounded healer archetype. I once met someone who grew up being praised only when silent. She became the adult who apologized for existing. If a boss raised an eyebrow, her whole body froze. Her inner transformation never got to bloom, because her inner child was still waiting for permission just to feel. Doesn't that sound eerily familiar? We mistake childhood pain for just a story, but it becomes architecture. Without warmth or validation, the psyche creates its own interpretations. I'm not enough. I must earn love. I shouldn't express myself. These internal scripts become a repressed self stored deep in the unconscious mind. Years later, they resurface as anxiety, emotional avoidance, or a constant hunger for approval. This is depth psychology in real time. The body remembers what the conscious mind forgets. Someone who felt unseen may become the adult who overworks, striving to be valued. Another may hide completely, terrified of exposure. It's like planting seeds in darkness. Roots grow, but unsure of direction. And strangely, even when life seems stable, something still aches. This invisible wound also plays out through psychological archetypes in everyday life. The hero who never asks for help. The caretaker who rescues everyone but themselves. The clown who jokes through pain. These are not random personalities. They are personas built to protect the shadow in relationships. Carl Jung noted that what we refuse to face returns as fate. These archetypes repeat until acknowledged. Someone who never felt supported may become the constant giver, hoping eventually to be chosen. But emotional projection in love often turns this into a painful cycle. The more they give, the more invisible they feel. And strangely, the pattern feels strangely familiar, almost safe. Just when we think time should have healed it, life reveals otherwise. The unconscious mind doesn't forget. It stores everything symbolically. A frustrated partner, a quiet friend, a demanding boss, each can awaken that same childhood feeling of not being seen. This is where the individuation process begins, when the adult realizes the past is still living in the present. The wounded healer inside starts whispering that something deeper seeks attention. Many who explore Jung and spirituality eventually sense this pull, a synchronicity explained not by coincidence, but by inner alchemy calling them home. The truth is simple yet uncomfortable. The child who was never seen didn't disappear. They just learned to hide. And eventually, they asked to be met again, which brings us to the next, surprising layer of the story. As the child grows, the invisible wound doesn't vanish. It simply learns to dress itself. The grown-up becomes a master of disguise, crafting masks to protect the unconscious mind from feeling that same old rejection. Carl Jung called these masks the persona, the version of ourselves we present to the world to fit in, to be loved, or at least to avoid more hurt. Some people build the strong one mask, always capable, always composed, never needing help. Others become the quiet observer, keeping distance to avoid emotional impact. These masks aren't lies. They are survival strategies. They allow the human psyche to keep going, even when the shadow carries unspoken pain. But if you look closely, you can see the cracks. One of the most common masks is the people pleaser, someone who believes love must be earned. Their emotional awareness is sharp. They can sense the needs of others before their own. To them, harmony is safety. They'll say yes even when everything inside screams no, fearing that boundaries could cost them connection. In everyday life, you see this in the friend who never asks for anything, or the employee who works late just to prove their worth. This persona looks generous, and it is, but often it hides a repressed self terrified of abandonment. A simple exercise for someone like this is to practice saying no once a week, starting small. It's awkward at first, but slowly, the inner voice of the self gets louder. Another mask is the performer, the one who uses humor, talent, or success to stay safe. They've learned that if they shine brightly enough, maybe no one will notice the shadows they carry. This pattern often appears in the hero's journey archetype, where light and darkness coexist. Emotional alchemy here looks like turning pain into productivity. They might excel academically or professionally, collecting achievements as armor. But when the applause stops, silence feels threatening. Depth psychology teaches us that performance can't protect the unconscious forever. If you've ever felt empty after accomplishing something big, that's the inner child reminding you that validation isn't love. Some develop the caregiver mask, rooted in the wounded healer archetype. They are always ready to rescue others, offering support, advice, presence, because it distracts them from their own unmet needs. Jungian psychology calls this projection and perception. We often sense in others what we refuse to acknowledge in ourselves. A person who grew up emotionally neglected may become the adult who gives endlessly, hoping someone will finally care for them with the same intensity. You see it in relationships where someone tries to fix their partner, believing love means healing another's shadow. Books like The Language of Letting Go or Attached can help someone recognize this pattern and redirect that care inward. Then there is the stone wall mask, the one who feels safest behind emotional distance. They learned early that vulnerability invited pain, so they shut down. They might seem calm, detached, even spiritual on the surface, yet the unconscious carries fear of intimacy. Synchronicity explained through their life reveals repeated relationships that never fully open, or dreams filled with locked rooms, a classic Jungian dream symbol. They may believe they are simply independent, but beneath that independence lives a longing they've forgotten how to express. These masks function well, until they don't. Eventually, life begins to challenge the persona, asking the inner alchemy to begin. And that's when we unknowingly step into the next cycle, repeating the same pain we once tried so hard to escape. It's a puzzling truth. People often return to the very environments that once wounded them. On the surface, it seems irrational. Why re-enter the fire? Yet Jungian psychology shows that the unconscious mind is drawn to what's familiar, not necessarily what's healthy. The human psyche tries to repair old pain by repeating it, hoping for a different ending. This is the shadow in relationships, choosing partners, friends, or jobs that mimic childhood dynamics. It's as if the inner child believes that if the story plays out again, maybe this time they'll finally be seen. And so, we circle through patterns, guided by symbols and meaning hidden beneath conscious intention. Take someone who grew up emotionally unseen, neglected, dismissed, or overlooked. As an adult, they may choose emotionally unavailable partners, not because they enjoy suffering, but because the familiar feels safer than the unknown. The unconscious whispers, "This time, it will work." This echoes the hero's journey, one more attempt to heal the inner child by rewriting the past. In his seminal work Homecoming, John Bradshaw describes how wounded children unconsciously seek reenactment, hoping to earn the love they were denied. His central lesson is simple yet powerful. Healing begins only when we stop chasing validation from those incapable of giving it. That truth alone can transform an entire lifetime. Sometimes this repetition emerges in professional life. Someone criticized or bullied as a child may end up working under a narcissistic boss, believing if they finally prove themselves, the old wound will close. The same story appears in The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who teaches that trauma lives not only in memory but also in the body. His core lesson: until emotional wounds are processed, the body unconsciously seeks familiar pain, trying to resolve what the mind could not. One client told me she kept seeking harsh leaders, thinking that winning their approval would validate her worth. But really, she was still trying to earn the love she never received at home. The unconscious mind, clever and persistent, keeps us looping until we listen. Repetition also reveals itself in Jungian dream symbols. Dreams of locked rooms, distant figures, or childhood homes often surface when the repressed self wants expression. In Jung's view, these dreams carry psychological archetypes from the collective unconscious, urging us towards self-awareness. When similar relationships or emotional experiences repeat, it's not coincidence, it's synchronicity explained as a mirror. These loops are not punishments, they are invitations to grow. Yet because these cycles feel familiar, many confuse them with destiny. They think they are meant to hurt, when the individuation process is actually guiding them toward inner transformation. The psyche often behaves like a child fixing a cracked toy with tape, trying the same strategy again and again, hoping this time it will hold. But unprocessed trauma can't be outsmarted, it must be seen. Shadow integration techniques can help: journaling dreams, naming emotional triggers, practicing somatic presence, or studying depth psychology through Jung and modern psychology. For some, spiritual awakening practices expand their emotional awareness, helping them distinguish intuition from trauma. The inner voice of the self gradually becomes clearer, whispering that healing doesn't come from repeating the story, but from understanding why we were drawn to it at all. And once this truth emerges, something inside quietly begins to shift, preparing us for the next, powerful realization. There comes a quiet moment, sometimes after heartbreak, a sudden loss, or a hollow kind of success, when a person realizes the wound they thought was fixed never truly left. It feels like consciousness finally pauses and says, "Wait, something inside still hurts." In Jungian psychology, this is the first spark of true self-awareness, the inner call that signals the start of the individuation process. The unconscious mind begins to surface gently, showing fragments of the child who once learned to survive through silence or perfection. Carl Jung believed these moments arrive when the persona can no longer carry the weight of the shadow, asking the adult to reconnect with their forgotten innocence. It's often subtle: a sudden emotional trigger, a dream, or an unexpected sadness that appears while doing something simple like driving or washing dishes. Many describe it as a spiritual awakening, a moment both familiar and disorienting, as if two timelines, past and present, suddenly overlap, inviting light and darkness to sit at the same table. For some, This awakening emerges through dreams, where psychological archetypes speak more honestly than the waking mind. A child version of themselves might appear, or they find themselves wandering through an old home filled with locked rooms. Classic Jungian dream symbols pointing toward repressed memories. Research published in the Journal of Analytical Psychology notes that recurring childhood imagery during sleep often signals that the psyche is attempting to resolve emotional material left frozen in time. These dreams rarely speak in plain language. Instead, they use symbols and meaning, familiar toys, school corridors, or voices of long-lost relatives. At this stage, emotional alchemy begins. Old memories rise from the collective unconscious, and the hero's journey turns inward. The unconscious mind invites us to decode how the wounded child shaped our beliefs about love, safety, and self-worth. Even people who never considered themselves spiritual report strange synchronicities, numbers repeating, relevant songs playing at the right time, gently guiding them deeper. For many, the awakening doesn't begin with dreams at all, but through everyday life. A friend forgets to call back, and the reaction feels disproportionately painful. A partner needs space, and suddenly abandonment panic appears out of nowhere. A simple mistake at work brings tears that seem bigger than the situation. These moments reveal the shadow in relationships, showing us that not all reactions belong to the present moment. Many belong to the inner child who once felt helpless, unseen, or unprotected. I've heard people say, "I don't know why that upset me so much," only to later realize the trigger mirrored an old emotional pattern. That's Jung and modern psychology working hand in hand, reminding us that the human psyche carries layers of memory beneath consciousness. When emotional awareness expands, the body begins to remember stories the mind forgot. And although these reactions can feel alarming, they are actually signs that the unconscious mind is asking for healing, not punishment. As curiosity deepens, many begin looking for tools to help. Some turn to somatic practices like somatic experiencing, developed by Dr. Peter Levine, which teaches that trauma is stored not only in memory but in the nervous system itself. His research suggests that gentle bodily awareness can release frozen survival responses, tremors, tension, or numbness, bringing the repressed self back into wholeness. Others explore internal family systems, IFS, a model created by Dr. Richard Schwartz, which views the psyche as a collection of parts, including the inner child, each carrying protective roles or burdens. IFS encourages the adult self to approach these parts with compassion rather than judgment, a method deeply aligned with Jungian spirituality. Creative practices, like movement, drawing, music, or guided visualization, also help unlock emotional material that language can't reach. Even playful exercises, such as writing with the non-dominant hand or reconnecting with childhood tastes and games, can awaken forgotten curiosity and soften internal resistance. These practices, though simple, can become powerful portals into depth psychology and inner transformation. And then something mysterious begins to happen, synchronicity explained, patterns and coincidences that feel too precise to ignore. A podcast randomly answers a question you've been struggling with. A stranger shares a childhood story that feels identical to yours. An old memory resurfaces at the exact moment you're finally ready to face it. The collective unconscious seems to collaborate, sending symbolic messages not to frighten you, but to guide you. People often describe feeling accompanied by an inner voice of the self, gentle, wise, patient, urging them toward healing. This is when the wounded healer archetype begins to awaken. Suddenly, personal pain starts to feel like it carries purpose. But recognizing the inner child is only the first doorway. Once we finally see them, scared, hopeful, waiting, a deeper question arises. What does this child need from me now? And that question quietly leads us to the next stage of the journey. Healing is less like flipping a switch and more like learning a forgotten language, the language of the unconscious mind. In Jungian psychology, this journey marks a return to the self, the inner alchemy that brings light and darkness into dialogue. It begins when we stop asking, "What's wrong with me?" and start wondering, "What happened to me?" This shift opens space for compassion. Fragmented pieces of the human psyche, the protector, the inner child, the wounded healer, begin to reveal themselves. And as they do, the individuation process subtly unfolds, guiding us from survival toward authenticity. There's no rigid timeline. Healing moves in spirals, with setbacks that are not failures, but invitations. Some begin by building emotional awareness, learning to name feelings rather than bury them. This may sound simple, but for someone who grew up silencing emotions, it's revolutionary. Shadow work helps here. Instead of judging the dark parts, we listen to them. A helpful practice is journaling conversations with your inner child, asking what they fear, what they need, and how you can show up. This dialogue transforms projection and perception. As inner needs get clearer, relationships outside become healthier. Many find that reading authors like James Hollis, who wrote The Middle Passage, or Clarissa Pinkola Estes, author of Women Who Run with the Wolves, provides maps for this journey. Their core lesson: the unconscious holds wisdom, not just wounds. Others find healing through the body. Trauma, after all, doesn't live only in memory, it lives in muscle and breath. Techniques like breathwork, yoga, or somatic experiencing invite the nervous system to release what's been held too long. Even simple grounding practices, noticing feet on the floor, naming objects in the room, can help regulate the psyche during emotional overwhelm. Jung and modern psychology agree that healing requires embodiment. Consciousness alone cannot mend fractures. Slowly, the repressed self begins to feel safe enough to return. This is where the symbolism of light and dark becomes real, not metaphor, but lived experience. Community can also be medicine. Sharing stories with trusted friends, support groups, or spiritual circles can loosen isolation and soften shame. The collective unconscious often works through others. They speak words we needed to hear or mirror parts of ourselves we couldn't see. And sometimes the most unexpected guides appear: a mentor, a therapist, a book, or even a symbolic dream. These encounters remind us that we are not alone in the hero's journey. When synchronicity appears, the right conversation at the right time, it's often a sign that the inner voice of the self is leading us forward. The wounded healer archetype awakens, revealing that our pain can serve others, too. And little by little, fragmentation gives way to wholeness. We stop trying to fix ourselves and learn to hold our story with tenderness. The shadow becomes a companion rather than an enemy. The inner child stops hiding and begins to trust. And the persona softens, allowing us to live more honestly. Healing the inner child doesn't erase the past. It transforms our relationship to it. We begin to understand the power of the mind, not as a tool for control, but as a bridge between past and future, darkness and light. Yet even as this new sense of inner wholeness emerges, there remains a quiet invitation. Something deeper still wants to be told, which leads us back to where this journey truly began. You've just traveled through memories, patterns, and quiet truths, not to reopen old wounds, but to finally recognize that the uneasy feelings you carry, the sudden heaviness, the pull toward familiar pain, the fear of being unseen, are not signs of weakness, but echoes of a younger self who learned to survive without being held. Now, the veil has shifted. You can see that what once felt like a flaw was simply a child asking to be acknowledged. Healing doesn't demand dramatic breakthroughs. It happens when you pause long enough to notice what rises inside you, when you allow yourself to name what hurts, and when you offer that younger version of yourself the compassion they never received. Every boundary you set, every honest conversation you allow, every moment you choose presence over avoidance is a quiet declaration that your story deserves space. These small decisions, repeated over time, begin stitching fragmented pieces into something whole. So here's the invitation. Take one step, just one. Maybe it's journaling a memory that still lives beneath your skin, reaching out to someone you trust, or simply admitting that part of you is still learning how to be seen. The child within you doesn't need perfection, only your willingness to show up. And as you do, you'll notice how the same situations that once felt unbearable slowly begin to lose their power, because you're no longer navigating them alone. Now I'd love to hear from you. What part of today's journey resonated most deeply? Did a memory surface, a pattern become clearer, or a feeling finally make sense? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your story may be the mirror someone else needs. And if this message reminded you of someone who might be carrying invisible wounds too, please share this video with them. It could be the beginning of their healing as well. If this conversation touched something inside you, make sure you subscribe, click the notification bell, and join us here each day as we continue exploring these inner landscapes with honesty, gentleness, and a growing courage to face what was once left in the dark.